Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is Chullin Yud Beis, Chullin 12. So we're going to start on Chullin Yud Beis, 4 lines from the top. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rav, Ra Echad Shachar. Let's say you saw one person do the Shlita, Nimra'ahu Mitchil Vatsof. If you saw him do the Shlita from the beginning until the end, then Mutter, then you could eat from his Shlita, but if you didn't see him shachted from beginning till end, also you can't eat from a shlita. Gemara says, Gemara wants to know what's the scenario, because obviously if you saw him, you could eat from it. That's what our Mishnah said. And obviously if you didn't see him, what's the chiddush? So, hechidami, idiyada degami, or if you know that he knows the laws of shlita, Amali Ra, why do you need to see him? Vidiyada de logamir, and if you know he doesn't know it, Shita, obviously you need to see him from beginning to the end. So the Gemara says, Ela de lo yada igamir logamir. We don't know if he knows or if he doesn't know. We're not sure. But if that's the case, we should still also rely upon him. Because because why don't we apply the principle that the majority of the people who get involved with Shlita are experts? And the Rambam says it's because every Jew has a cheskos kashrus. We assume that every Jew is kosher, and that's the presumption. Milutanya, didn't we learn? Let's say you find a chicken slaughtered in the marketplace. Or you said to the agent, go out and slaughter for me. And he goes out, and then he finds, and you went out and you found the animal was slaughtered. We see there's presumption is that it is slaughtered. But why? What's the reasoning here? Because we say, isn't it because the presumption is that the majority of the people get involved with the Shlita are experts? So also in this case, well, we can assume that if you don't know if he knows the halacha, we could assume that he did it properly. Gemara says no. Well, olam diyada gamir. You know for sure he didn't learn it. He didn't know it. If we go into shachat, kaman achad siman, shapir, that he slaughtered in front of us one siman, and he did that one siman properly. We know that you need to do by a behema 2 simanim, and in this case, he only did one of the simanim. He only did the trachea or the esophagus, presumably the trachea because it's on top. So he only did one of them. You might have told me the high shapir, and the fact that he did this first siman properly, achnami shapir, he did the second siman also properly. Kamashma, hi, Isrami way. Idach shamasha shamadaris. So we see from here that we say no, the first one maybe he was able to get it right, but the other ones, maybe he's going to do the second siman, maybe he's going to do shehiyah or drasa, pausing or chopping, and it wouldn't be good. Next case, Vamine. We're in the middle of Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Vamine Rav Dimi Bar Yosef knew Rav Nachman. So Rav Dimi, the son of Yosef, says to Rav Bar Yosef says to Rav Nachman, Omer l'shluchot say v'shachot v'ha'ochu matzah shachot mahu. Let's say a person says to his agent, go out and slaughter for me. And now he goes out and he finds it slaughtered. What's the halacha there? Do we say armalo chaskaso shachot? So Rav Nachman says that we could assume that it was slaughtered properly. Homer shluchot say v'tarom v'hoch matzah tarom bai. So Rav Dimi Bar Yosef follows up with Rav Nachman. Let's say you say to your agent, go out and take a truma for me from my crops, tithe my crops. And then the Baal Bayis goes out and he discovers that the crops were tithed, and he doesn't know who exactly did the tithing. So in that case, Rav Nachman says, Amarei ein chatzkas otarim. It's not going to be a valid tie. So the Gemara asks the question, Manav shach. Pick one. So if the assumption is that the agent does his agency properly, then I feel trumanami. Then if the presumption is that any agent that you send out will do his shlichus, then even truma also we should assume was tied. The ein chazaka shliachos shlichaso, and if the presumption is that the shliach does not do his shlichus, feel shlita namilo. Even by shlita, we shouldn't say it's a valid shlita. So how does Rav Nachman want to explain the distinction between the two cases? So Rav Nachman says to Rav Dimi bar Yosef, "L'chitecho ala kur de milcha." When go out first and measure me a core of salt. What's the concept here? Rashi says this is a language of b'dichusa ba'almahu. He's saying I'll do it for you, but you have to do some service for me. But he said it's like a bedicha, like a joke. There's an expression that they use in those days. So Rav Nachman says ein chazaka shliach osa shlich. Well, generally speaking, we say ein chazaka shliach osa shlichuso. Typically speaking, we cannot assume that the shliach will do his agency. Ushlita inami dilma ina shachrini shama v'azov shachad. So what's the concern by the shlita? Even if the agent doesn't do it, we could say that even that maybe another person did it. Well, that would still be okay because rov mitzuyin eitzel shlita mumchanim. The majority of the people who do the shlita are experts, so it doesn't even matter if the agent has done it. Somebody who was a kosher shaychet did it, and so therefore we can rely upon it. But with respect to truma, there we have a concern. Since we can't assume that the agent did his agency, Dilma ina shachrini shama v'azavatar. Maybe somebody else did it. You heard and he went and did the tithe. And avoi torm shlomi das, but that won't work because if the truma requires direct agency, direct intent, and this person who did it without the knowledge of the owner. And somebody takes the tithe without the knowledge of the owner. Ain't truma so truma. It's not valid. Rashi says the shlichus to truma, the agency by truma comes from gam atem, from the pasuk of gam atem, to include your agents. From there we learn just like you have the intent to do it. Also, your agent has to have your intent. So that's how Rav Nachman explains why he gives the ruling by Shlita that it's okay if you found it shechted, but not by Teruma, and it's not because we assume a Shliach Osa Shlichus. So we say a Shliach does not do his agency. Because by Shlita we have the overarching principle that Rov Mitzvah Shlita Mumchanin. You do remember that the Gemara does have elsewhere the idea that we do have to be concerned to be strict that Rov Mitzuyin, that a shliach does his agency, as we saw the case where a person says to his agent, "Go out and betroth for me a woman," and then the agent dies, and we don't know who he betrothed or if he betrothed. Then we said that he's prohibited to every woman in the world, maybe because he's going to end up marrying the sister. So there we are concerned to be strict to say chazaka shliach osa shlichusa. So the Gemara says, let's say that this concept that the majority of the people who do a shlita are experts is actually Tanaihi, is actually Machokas Tanaim. The Tanya Harelo, Haresha Abdul Kadiab Vitana Golov. Let's say he lost his goats or his chickens, and he goes and he finds them slaughtered. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chanina Benosh Rabbi Yossi Aguli Matir. Rabbi Yehuda says they're no good. You can't rely upon them. Rabbi Chanina, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aguli, says they are kosher. I'm a Rabbi Nirin Divrei. Rabbi Yehuda, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda that they're not kosher. Shemitzam ba'ashpa. If you find them in the trash, because then presumably why the person threw them out? Because they were not slaughtered properly. Udiva Rabbi Chanina b'nosh Rabbi Yossi Aglili shemitzam b'bayis. And I agree with Rabbi Chanina b'nosh Rabbi Yossi Aglili that they're kosher if you find them in the house. Okay, so what's the argument here? Maybe we'll say that Rabbi Yehuda is of the position Rov between Eitzel Shlita Mumchanin. Maybe Rabbi Chanina ben Rabbi Yossi Aglili must say that the majority of the people who are by Shlita are experts, therefore we can rely upon it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says just the opposite, therefore we can't rely upon it. Well, that's not the argument. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who is strict here, would admit that the majority of people who do Shlita are experts. So, and if it was found in the house, even Rabbi Yehuda would say it's permitted. And if you find it in the trash can, in the public trash can, everybody would say it's prohibited. Where is it a dispute? Where is it a dispute? If you find it in the trash in your house. Mar Savar, Rabbi Yehuda will be in the position of Adam a person wouldn't be concerned to throw out the carcass in his house. He's not as concerned somebody's going to come and eat it from the trash. And so therefore I'll throw out, since it's in a veil, I'll throw it out even in his house. Whereas Rabbi Chanina, ben Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, whereas Rabbi Chanina is saying, no, a person would not throw it out in their own house because if it's not kosher. So it must be it's kosher. And so that's a dispute. So they both, everybody agrees, they're just arguing about the scenario where somebody threw it out in their own house. So Amar Mar, but it can't be because we continue with the Brisa that Rabbi says, in that same Brisa, Rabbi said, Nirin Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Shemitzam Ba'ashpa, that Rabbi, how we're going to challenge Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's explanation because the conclusion of that Brisa says that Rabbi said, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda where you found it in the marketplace, where you found it in the trash. Now, where is Rabbi agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda? My ashpa, which trash? If it's the ashpa in the shuk, if it's the ashpa in the market, you, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, said everybody would agree that it's prohibited there. Everybody says it's prohibited. So Rabbi must agree with Rabbi Yehuda if you found it in the ashpa in the house. Amos safe. What about the next cause? And he says, I agree with Rabbi Yossi Aglili if you found it in the house. Now, my bias, which house is that? Bias mamish. If you only say if you find it in your actual house, we just said that everybody agrees. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's permitted in that case. So it must be that it's clearly where is Rabbi saying that he agrees with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Pshita b'ashpa shababayis. You must clearly agree in the ashpa in the house. Well, now we have a kasha, the Rebbe at the Rebbe's. This is a dispute between Rebbe on Rebbe. And meaning to say, you're saying Rebbe agrees with Rabbi Yossi Aglili with the ashpa in the house, but he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda ashpa in the house. That can't be. So your explanation doesn't work. So therefore, what is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak saying? This is what Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak means. Nirin divrei Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Chanina b'nosh Rabbi Yossi Aglili ba'asher v'shabashok. She'af Rabbi Chanina b'nosh Rabbi Yossi Aglili lo nechok olav el ba'asher v'shabayis. Ba'asher v'shok modulei. And he's Nirin the other way. Meaning to say, he's saying that they're not actually arguing with each other. They both agree with each other. That meaning to say, he's saying that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is not arguing with Rabbi Yehuda in the ashpa. That's all Rabbi's saying. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is not arguing with Rabbi Yehuda if it's in the ashpa in the marketplace. He's only arguing with him in the ashpa in the house. And Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with Rabbi Yossi, with Chanina, son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, if it's found in the house. He's only arguing with him on the ashpa in the house. And that would be presumably the principle of whether or not you keep the nevela in your house. So it's not the dispute of rov between etzel shlita and mumchanim. Says the Gemara, chutz misherish v'katan. Our Mishnah said everybody who shechs their shlita is kosher, except for chereshot v'katan, except for the case of a deaf mute and a minor, where we said, going back to the Mishnah, it says shema yikalko eshlitasan. Maybe they'll mess up the shlita, but then it says, and everybody who shechs, that everybody who shechs another seed is shlitas kshera. So it doesn't say, the Gemara says shema kilku ogtani. It doesn't say that the deaf mute minor messed up the shlita. Ela shema yikalku. Maybe they will mess up the shlita. Meaning to say, what does that mean? That even initially speaking, we can't give them shlita to shecht and say, don't worry, we'll stand next to the minor. No, so you can't do that. Even though you say, I'm going to watch him do it, you're not allowed to do it. It's only b'diavad that if you're standing next to him, it's okay. The kulin sheshachtu v'acher morona so shchita sing share it. And our Mishnah said, everyone who shechts and others see them, the shchita is kshera. So we see even a minor who shechts, if somebody's next to him, the shchita is kshera. So Mantana the roba inan kavana shchita. Obviously, the minor is not capable of having intent. So who's the one who says that we don't require intent for shchita? Rashi explains the deaf mute and the minor and the shota, the insane, they're just intending to cut a piece of meat. They have no intent for a shlita. And yet we say that everyone who shecht it is kosher. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, that must be that our Mishnah is the position of Rabbi Natani. The Tanya, Oshaya Zeira de Min Chavraya. Oshaya, the smallest one of the Chavra. But I saw one explanation that the smallest one doesn't mean that he's the least. It can mean that he's the source of the Chavra. Zarak Sakin Lenoat Savakoto. Let's say you threw a knife against the wall. Let's say, doesn't have to mean you're playing darts. This is how they used to store their knives. They would store they didn't have cabinets usually. Like they didn't have our cabinets. They would store their knife by putting it in the wall. So Zarak Sakal no it's a kotel. Let's say you went and you threw your knife in the wall. V'hocha v'shachta kedarka. And while you're throwing it into the wall, it happened to like kill a bird, kill a chicken. Rabbi Nosson machshir. Rabbi Nosson says it's kosher because you don't require intent, like our Mishnah. The Chachamim poslin, and the Chachamim say that it's disqualified. So we see from here that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Nosson. So the Gemara says, Hutani Lavu Amirla, that Rava taught this, and then he explained halachak Rabbi Nosson. The laws are like Rabbi Nosson. So the Gemara asked the question, but how could it be that if you throw your knife against the wall, it's kosher? We have a technical question. Maybe in order to make sure that there's no drasa, that there's no chopping of the simanim, the Gemara also tells us that we require holacha v'ova. You have to bring the knife back and forth, slicing it and not chopping it. So it must be, how could it be kosher in this case? So the Gemara answers, Shahocha uba kedarka. So you threw it against the wall and it rebounded back. So that's what happened here. And so you did have holacha uba. The Gemara, Rashi gives another explanation that the prohibition or the requirement of halacha v'ova is only to prevent drasas, to prevent chopping. So there's another way. If you use a very long knife so that you have long enough time that you don't have to chop, that you could use the whole knife and that will be okay. Rashi says the matzu tarutze b'stakin sheyesh bo chutz l'tzavar k'moy tzovar. If you have a knife that has basically full length outside the knife, that's the full length of the neck, that there will be okay to do halacha by itself. Okay, so now Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba by Rabbi Yochanan. Katan yesh lo machshava o ein lo machshava. Let's say we go to the question of shchitas kachim, slaughtering kachim, where we require intent. So if a katan slaughters an olah lishma, is that going to be considered kavana or not? Katan yesh lo machshava o ein lo machshava. Amor Rabbi Ami, so Rabbi Ami says to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, he says, why don't you ask about an action? Tibayile Maisa. He should ask the question if the katan does the deed, meaning to say, do we say that his deed will indicate what his thought process is? Rashi tells us what the Gemara is going to say that the scenario is. Now, let's say you have an olah korban, which we know from Zavachim needs to be slaughtered in the north, and the katan takes this animal, which was in the south, and he brings it to the north, to slaughter it. So do we say that this Maisa is going to be considered like he had intent, and so therefore it's okay? So says Rabbi Ami, Ma'ishna Maisa the law coming by the way. Why is it the case that you didn't ask about an action, and it's obvious because you agree with the Mishnah because it's obviously the case that you agree with a Mishnah we're about to cite in a moment from Kalim. So the Maisha the Tanan Yesh Maisa, because it says that their actions are indicative. Machshava Nami Goti by you also shouldn't even ask about intent, because the same Mishnah that says that the actions of a minor are something that we can rely upon to prove intent also says that his thought process by itself is not enough. And what is this Mishnah in Kalim? The Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim. Hold on, I'm going to stop the recording now. We'll go on a little bit, but this is tomorrow's daf. So